The Battle of Britain is about to begin.
Deep right, we got tanks up there. Let's follow a range on deep right. I'm right on the target right now. I've got a couple right in front of me. I'm going after it. Right, I got him.
Welcome back to the Lead Pursuit Podcast. Okay, we heard you. You told us to stop whining about competitive games and organized play and get back to real history. But I think everyone forgets that I'm here on the podcast with two jokers, one of whom is the White Claw of World War II history, our very own Steve. Steve, how you doing tonight?
Hey, I'm prepared for tonight, man. Coral Sea, Season 2, Episode 4, Baba Black Sheep. I got it, man. We're good to go.
It's all the history you need to know at that point. Well, then I also have my other podcast teammate, Brett, who is the master of the Luftwaffe that never flew. Brett, how you doing tonight?
Oh, we're talking about DO-335s tonight?
Yeah, no, we're not talking about DO-335s.
Oh, man.
The best Luftwaffe airplane, I must say. But yeah, not tonight. And we're not talking about any other, Japanese airplanes that didn't fly. No, this is all real history. But anyway, so because I'm saddled with these two guys, tonight I decided to let other guys come on the podcast, talk about history, and I've got two real historical war gamers on tonight. David and Cruz, how y'all doing tonight?
Doing good.
Thanks, you two, for joining us to offset the lack of historical knowledge from the other two on this podcast. We're going to knock out some quick Blood Red Skies and Lead Pursuit admin and talk about a couple events, and then we'll get to tonight's main topic, talking about narrative wargaming and new players. So with that, let's talk about an event that I've been remiss and keep forgetting. Hold the Line on September 13th and 14th at the Liberty Aviation Museum in Port Clinton, Ohio. Our good buddy Steve Gusky is going to be up there. He's going to be running a lot of Blood Red Skies. There's a lot of other games that are going on. And go up there, enjoy playing with Steve and his crew. It's going to be a great time. Great historical wargaming. And if you're playing Blood Red Skies with Steve Gusky, you never know what random third country, fourth line Air Force he will have all painted up for you to play. So if Dutch East Indies is what you want to play in early World War II, you can do that with Steve. But it's going to be a good time. So please go participate in those events. You've heard us talk about Millennium Con and Fall In both at the end of October. Casey will be at Millennium Con in Texas. He'll be handling a lot of the jet events down there. There's also a Blood Red Skies Battle of Britain event on Friday. So enjoy those games down there at Millennium Con in their new venue as they're set up in Temple, Texas. So really looking forward to them getting a successful Millennium Con under their belt this year and getting that new venue all set. For us going to Fall In up in Lancaster, PA, it'd be Steve and myself. Friday, our good friend Charles is probably going to run a narrative game, or we'll host some jet games. We will have our streaming table there. We will be in the vendor hall like we were last year. So please come by and see us and laugh as you see how much money we spend buying more miniatures because we're stuck in the vendor hall every day, all day, and I'll be broke. But we're also going to have the Blood Red Skies tournament on Saturday, 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. So show up prepared, feeling competitive, but still being a good sports person out there. Pre-registration, list submission, all on the Gathering of Eagles site. Please submit your list. You don't have to. It's not a requirement. It makes it easier for me to do the pairings ahead of time and realize how to give everyone an enjoyable round one. And then you can be miserable in round 2s and 3 when the CR-42 biplanes shoot you out of the sky. So congratulations to those of you who fly biplanes and are now ruining our meta for our competitive games. No, it'll be a good time and we'll have fun. We'll do some streaming. When the vendor hall is closed, we'll be up in the main building with everyone else. If you have a Blood Red Skies event, please send us that information. That way we can get you guys out on the schedule. All right. Without further ado, and I laugh because now we are back at the same place we were approximately 10 minutes ago when Doug forgot to hit the record button. So this is my second run through of the podcast at this point. So tonight, let's talk a little bit about how we ended up finding out about this event. I love going to conventions primarily for the people. Yes, I love playing the games, but it's hilarious the cross section of gamers you meet, the backgrounds we come from, the events that we get to play in. And Blood Red Skies is one of those games that is always infuriating for me, because I meet so many people that are not playing in an event of mine, and they're like, "Oh, you do Blood Red Skies? Oh, you're that idiot from the Lead Pursuit podcast." No, I don't listen to you. I listen to real podcasters. But yeah, you're the Lead Pursuit guy. And then they say, "Oh, we play Blood Red Skies all the time in my group." And I usually say, "Are you playing in our events?" "Oh, no, because I play Blood Red Skies all the time at home. Thanks. I'll just be over here playing Blood Red Skies with Brett and myself. It's awesome." But no, we didn't have that problem with Cruz. Cruz, we ran into you up in Nashville. Had a great time at NashCon talking. Got you in the Vietnam game. I think you were flying the F-105s, I think.
Yes, indeed. Yep.
Yeah, so sorry, you were kind of the punching bag in that scenario, but it's a fun one.
That was my first game.
Yeah. So that was also a hard introduction to Blood Red Skies. Congratulations. We're going to throw you in with jets, and we're going to give you the bombers to have to get to the target. But that was a lot of fun, and we spent a lot of time talking. But for the podcast audience, give us a little bit about your background, how you got into gaming, and then how you specifically got into Blood Red Skies.
Oh, my goodness. I started doing board gaming in middle school in the 60s. I did Napoleonics in college. I got into Ancients right after college and did Ancients up until the early 90s, which I switched over to Warhammer. A few years when I was in Texas in the mid-'80s with Amarillo Design Bureau there. So Starfleet Battles was the game of choice for a couple years.
A thoroughly unappreciated game, I must say. I know Steve and Brett look at me like, "Shut up, you hex encounter nerd." But yes, Star Trek with hexes and counters.
But if you lived in Texas at that time, you had to play.
Yeah,
you had to play that game. And they did an Origins in Dallas, and I forget how many players they had. They had 400 and something, I think, playing Starfleet Battles at Origins in the mid-'80s or so in Dallas. And then early 90s, I got into Warhammer, and I got burned out on Warhammer about 5 years ago, and I've been into Flames of War since then. And I was at Recon watching my buddies playing Ancients. Recon was a con in Orlando, Florida, probably 3 months ago now. And I just got through reading a series of articles that were talking about some of the things the American pilots tried to do to overcome the technological disadvantage they were at with their airplanes in the mid-Pacific against the Japanese. Zero. And I found that very intriguing, trying to use human skills to offset a technological advantage that your opponent has. They didn't go into a lot of detail on that, but I thought that was interesting. And then when I hit the flea market at Recon, there was a guy selling the Battle of Britain set from Blood Red Skies with all the planes painted very nicely. And so I bought that. And, with the intention,
you should know better than walk through the flea market. Nothing good ever happens coming through the flea market.
Nothing good. And so I showed them to a couple of buddies I have who live in Jacksonville. One of them's retired recently, and he's got a whole battery of 3D printers. And he said, "Well, hey, you've got those. How about some Hinkle bombers and some Ju-88s and some this and that, and let's flesh everything out." And I've got another friend named Ali who likes to paint I pay him, but he likes to paint. And so they started feeding off each other, and suddenly one of them is printing up the stuff, handing the other stuff, and I'm getting all these packages in the mail of 9 Bettys.
First world problem. It sounds terrible, horrible. How do you suffer through such horrible situations? Yeah,
9 Bettys, 7 Nels. I mean, I'm getting all this stuff in the mail with everything else going on, and so now I've got like 100 of these airplanes painted up very nicely. I have not played a game yet. So at NashCon, I sat in on the demo game with you, and I'm going, Lord, I hope I love this game because I'm really invested in this game right now. And it turned out I liked it very well. I got in another game the next night to help a guy prep for the tournament. Yep. And he was really just leading me along. But so I've had 2 whole games under my belt, decided I like Blood Red Skies. And then I was very fortunate. And a couple weeks later, which was last weekend, David Kent, who's the other guy here with me, was running a very gigantic scenario of Coral Sea. And I should let him talk about all that stuff. But so I got in a 3rd game now. So I'm almost an expert now in Blood Red Skies with 3 games under my belt.
You've got more games under your belt than we had when we started the podcast, right, Brett?
Right.
May I remind you of that? One game in and Brett says, "Hey, let's do a podcast." Great idea, jerk. Here we are. Well, David, let's talk a little bit about you, since you're the either the great, wonderful person that put on this game, or the evil, maniacal bastard that suckered so many people into playing. Give us a little bit about your background for gaming and how you got into Blood Red Skies and those kind of things.
Shortly after the birth of my firstborn, I was looking for something to do, and it's going to sound pathetic, but I was just sort of tooling around on the internet and came across a couple blogs that had wargaming stuff on there. I remembered the time when I was a teenager and I enjoyed putting together models and painting and everything like that, and I decided, hey, I could try that again. Just through a couple other steps of looking for things around town in Tallahassee, I came in contact with Steve Quintero, who was with the Tallahassee Big Ben Historical Wargamers group, who, we have a nice fancy name and like zero presence anywhere that anyone can ever find us. And we're strange and insular in that way, as Cruz can tell you. But
wait, you mean there's actually a hobby group that isn't that way? That's surprising. I thought wargame groups were outgoing and yeah.
So they called me in for, they're saying, "Oh yeah, what are you interested in?" And I was kind of in this kick of wanting to play 7 Years War. So this is 10 years in, and I still haven't played a 7 Years War game yet. But they've managed to get me to run all sorts of other things and paint up all sorts of other models. I was initially never really interested in aerial wargaming either until one of the members of our group, Bob Freeman, who unfortunately passed away a couple years back, ran an Aerodrome 1.1 game.
Yes.
And oh gosh, that was so much fun. And then when he ended up passing away, I ended up coming into possession of that set and ran it for the group, and we'd try and run it at least once a year. And I ended up liking World War I gaming, so I ended up going into finding out about Wings of Glory stuff. And I didn't initially want to have a bunch of Wings of Glory stuff. That's probably a lie.
Yeah, I was about to say, do you expect us to believe
There was some sort of fabric craft store that was going out of business in like Iowa that had their stuff listed online for sale, and they out of nowhere had this little hobby section, and they were selling those Dornier 17s and the JU-88s for Wings of Glory for like I want to say it was like $760 something a piece. So anyway, I've got like 40 of those, and
play perfectly well in Blood Red Skies.
yeah. That's what
as we found.
Yeah, put all that stuff together, got a few other aircraft here and there, and now for my oldest on his birthday every year, we have a bunch of the kids from his class come together and their dads, and we will do his great big RAF Tangmere raid game, which we set up all the bombers, and they do an intercept, and we do that for a couple hours, and then they go off and play and have fun, have pizza and everything like that. But it's a good way of getting together with those kids, and really from there, my son started saying, well, what if I wanted to control more than one airplane? And that's really something that with Wings of Glory is difficult to do unless you've got a lot of cognitive load. So I started looking into things, and that's when Blood Red Skies came to my attention, and I showed it off to both my boys, and they said, yeah, let's do that. And I was like, you have to paint the planes. And now, entirely too many planes later, we've got enough to do all of Coral Sea in 1/2 scale.
It's awesome. Yeah, we were laughing about that because I'm convinced that Brett does have all of the 109s for Malta and was working on all of the 109s and HE 111s for the Eastern Front. But it's no small feat to say that when you say that we did the Battle of Coral Sea and every aircraft at most represented 2 other aircraft. So that's a pretty neat accomplishment. I think it is funny though, comparing you and Cruz, and it's something that I try to bring up a lot to miniatures wargamers because they forget it, is that there's a lot of us that ended up in the miniature community, but started in the Hex Encounter community. And it drives my buddy Chris nuts, who is a miniature painter first, a Warhammer gamer second, and then whatever else he's come to dishonestly because we've shamed him into it. So his frame of reference is different than mine. I'm used to playing with little pieces of cardboard, reading some crappy combat results table and rolling like 3 dice. So it's not the same world that people who are miniatures gamers that have come in, especially as hobbyists, people who built models that didn't look like they'd been glued together by a Neanderthal, which is pretty much how mine from childhood looked. So I'm not a hobbyist. I'm not a model. Most of these are commission painted airplanes back there. But for me, it's always the gameplay. And I think we have to remember that when we start talking about bringing new players in, is that they come from a wide variety of backgrounds. And I've seen other game systems, and Brett and I have seen this a lot in Heresy, either turn people off or not get them what they want to enjoy in the game because it's all about the hobby or it's all about the precisely painted miniatures. And someone shows up and goes, I just want to roll dice, man. I just want to see stuff get blown up. And so I think that's definitely a tension that we a lot of times forget about as we bring new players in and get people in the hobby. But not to dwell too much on that topic because that comes later. Let's talk a little bit about the Battle of Coral Sea. So this is y'all's chance to educate us three morons, and I'll open the floor to Dave, you and Cruz both. Why Coral Sea, and what do you think's fascinating about gaming the aerial warfare part of Coral Sea?
Well, I don't have any particularly good historical reason for it other than I like broken things. If you're going to come down to, I like the idea of a great big grand aerial fight, and I also enjoy a good toddler slap fight. And if you really look at the way that the
that would be a good way to describe it. Yeah. That's how you describe Coral Sea. That pretty much makes sense.
Yeah. So that really caught my attention. So I ended up reading a bunch of things on it, and looking at some of those older books, like the old Jablonski Air War book from however many years ago that I ended up coming across in like a garage sale. Frank's Guadalcanal campaign book that he's got that I have not gotten very far in. So it'll, I'm not an expert on that, but it fascinates me to see what they were doing with what little they had at their disposal, and how their doctrines and behaviors and preconceptions all sort of informed their decision making and led to what all happened there.
Yeah.
And it's fun to see how modern gamers put into a similar situation will also handle that. And I really wanted to see that too.
I think that's a really important point, and we'll come back to that in a while, because I think, and we talked about it a little bit when the two of you and I were on earlier, that I think a lot of times historians look at World War II events through the lens of how we live today, where I can hop on a plane tomorrow, be in Australia in 18 hours, and the world is kind of small. The world of 1941, 1942 was not small. Those were long distances. And a lot of times we don't think about that. I know, Cruz, you and I had talked about that. There was so much buffoonery on the American side. There's a point where you feel like you're watching a slapstick comedy, and you're like, how can we mess it up this bad? So, Cruz, what were some of your takeaways for the Battle of Coral Sea?
Well, I've been reading. I tend to go in phases and go different places. And for about the last year, I've been focused on 42, 43 Pacific Theater. And what attracted me to that is just the way they stumbled, fumbled, bumbled kind of into that. They had agreed, Great Britain had said, we're going to do a Europe first fight, and we're all going to concentrate on Europe first, right? And the U.S. said yes. And Australia went, now, wait a minute.
Like, what about us?
Yeah. Well, they'd shipped all their troops off to Europe too. And so they went, okay. And so it was really only with limited resources that the U.S. was trying to hold on in 42 to the Pacific to focus elsewhere. But even with that, they got very aggressive, in my opinion. Coral Sea, they were very aggressive. Midway, they were very aggressive with limited resources that if they had lost, they had nothing else to deal with. Even landing in Guadalcanal, to me, was a big stretch with the resources they have to try to take on the Japanese when they were supposed to be focusing mainly on Europe. So, that's just appealed to me. And so I've liked Coral Sea. I like Guadalcanal. I like Midway. So when David put on this game of Coral Sea, I went, well, yes, let's go see what that's all about. And he pulled it off. The number of airplanes worked. When I played the demo game and the other game, game, in my head, I'm thinking about David's game. And okay, David is going to have a single player running 20 plus airplanes, and we're going to get that done in under an hour. They're going to come in, they're going to get through the cap, they're going to get through the AA, they're going to bomb the carrier, and they're going to get out of there. And you're going to have 3 different guys doing that, and cap fighting, zeros fighting, and you're going to get all that done in an hour. This is going to be interesting to see how he pulls that off, because David had 5 different tables, depending on what was being fought at the time, with different things on them. One had the American carriers, one had the Japanese carriers, one had just open terrain in case you happen to get an intercept, between the fleets, and then another table, smaller table, had the small Japanese carrier on it. And it turned out that Blood Red Skies, worked very well to me for what David was trying to do. I felt like I was fighting Coral Sea. I was making the kinds of decisions I felt like a guy flying cap, over the American carriers would be trying to make. Okay, the radar has picked up these guys. They're coming in. Do I divert some of the cap out to try to intercept them before they get near the fleet? Do I hold everybody back to try to just jumble up the formations as they come in for their runs? And all that, to me, David, through the scenario books and wherever he got the information from, all that worked extremely well, I thought.
Yeah, that's one of the things I've always loved about Blood Red Skies, and I know Steve and Brett kind of laugh at me about this, is that it may not simulate altitude well, it may not have great simulation stuff, but you feel like you're making tactical decisions. I mean, when we flew the Vietnam one, you guys had the real tactical decision as the thuds. Do we jet our bombs and have a chance to shoot down the MiGs? Do we make a run for it? Do we just run to the target and hope that the F-100s are going to save our bacon and they'll get tied up with the MiGs? But you feel like you have real tactical decisions. It's not like you're just in a dice chucking game where, okay, I'm going to move my models around. It really doesn't matter. All that matters is how I roll. There's an element of sometimes you're Steve and you throw 14 dice and fail, and you throw 14 dice again and still fail. But the core of the game is the tactical decisions. So I think that's always one of the neat things. And Dave, that's really what I'd love to hear about is how did you build into this construct of a game? Where did you start with your research? I mean, obviously we all start with, historical stuff, but what specific game scenarios or other, games and source books did you draw on to kind of help figure out how to tackle the problem?
That's going to be a hard one to answer. My group tends to do a lot of big games as opposed to multiple small games. So
Right.
We have this large history of, we have a monthly game that usually has, 8 to 12 players participating in it, which puts a lot of pressure on you to learn how to balance that group of people. It's kind of an acquired skill. I was not good at it at first. I've become better at it over time. But when Cruz and I were initially talking about Blood Red Skies, he just kind of brought it up, and I had chimed in from the other table. I don't even remember what we were playing at the time, but I was like, oh yeah, I have planes in that. And he said, well, can you put on a game? And I said, yes. And
Oh, you poor fool. You fell for that one, didn't you?
Yeah, entirely self-inflicted. I could have had half the aircraft and you'd been perfectly happy. But so one of the other things that I've done is when I started getting this collection, we started using Squadron Forward to sort of create this campaign for me and my sons, which means that we started collecting enough aircraft to fill an entire aircraft carrier. And then, of course, enough stuff for them to fight, which is sort of how we ended up with the number of aircraft that we have. And as we're doing that, trying to use that, we're stretching the game sort of to its limits and finding, where does this come apart for this 11-year-old or this 9-year-old to control these aircraft, and making little adjustments from there. Then the other part is I was thinking about how much I was enjoying basically being the game master for my kids' campaign, and how I wanted to give that experience to everybody else, so that when you're looking at the scouting, you don't really know the quality of your information.
Right.
So I started from looking at sort of what the decision loop was going to be for the commanders over at Coral Sea, and you can find that by finding little excerpts from their memoirs, if that exists, or other, learned individuals. I can't really name everything because I don't have it all at immediate command, and I didn't think to write any of it down. But once I knew that I wanted to represent that limited information, I had to look for a scouting system. So I already knew what my combat system was going to be. It was going to be Blood Red Skies. We were going to strip out a couple of the more finicky portions because of everyone that was there playing with our big game. We had about, how many was it, Cruz? About a dozen people?
About a dozen people, yes.
Yeah, and none of the others had played before, ever. So it was just, all right, this is how you move the aircraft. This is what the actions are like. This is how you do it. And then, of course, the little cheat sheet that comes with the starter set. I left all those at home, of course. So we're just going by memory. Go for this. And it ended up working really well. We didn't use any like the doctrine cards. Yep.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if you play perfect Blood Red Skies in these kind of events. It doesn't matter if you do things perfectly per the rule book. What I've always told people is, did everyone have a good time? Did everybody feel like they either learned some history or experienced some history or walked away understanding what the decisions were? Because I know when we would do our midway battles, when we'd do the attack on the Hornet, that was not perfect Blood Red Skies. There were rules I was just chucking out of the rule book or changing at the last minute because not that many torpedo bombers made it, so all of a sudden flak wasn't preemptive.
Oh yeah.
I think people need to understand it's perfectly fine to change the rules based on either your audience, the size of the event. There's things you may not want to roll for. And doctrine and theater cards, some of the first things to go because that's some interaction that people are going to get confused on. And like Steve and I say, and then multi-engine aircraft go right after that, right, Steve?
Yeah. So as we were looking at that and trying to, I had the combat end sort of narrowed down to that simplified version that I thought was going to work, and then after that, I needed to find a good search option, and that was also informed by previous games that we'd played. One of the legendary games that our group had done years and years ago had been Coral Sea with a different rule set, in which one of the players had taken his carriers and hidden them off into a corner, so no one ever found him. But also that sort of defeats the purpose. So I had looked through and I found what's it called, Carriers in a Bathtub thing from either the Airstrike rules or Wing Commander. I can't remember which one. And that's fantastic because it's taking sort of as your presumption that the carriers are trying to find each other actively.
Right.
And it works really well for just one group against one group. But at this point, I was trying to then represent multiple groups. So I went to another rule set called Striking Effectively First, and I grabbed their rules that they have about using an umpire for spotting and different. Essentially, there's this moving target. So instead of rolling a 6 or a 5 and knowing that you're getting a level of information, you're rolling against a moving target. And if you're off by 1, you'll get a lower degree of information. And I made way too many charts about this. Tons and tons and tons of stuff, like 6 pages of all these notes and these tables. The idea of like, okay, if they roll through this, knowing these numbers, they should get a result the first time or two they roll. So obviously I need to prepare 3 times that just in case everything goes horribly wrong. And it didn't. So each one of the groups that we had a group for the American carriers, for the Japanese fleet carriers, and for the Japanese escort carrier. They essentially had that grid that you have with the normal Blood Red Skies Carriers in a Bathtub game. And they would roll a bunch of dice. They'd assign them to each one of the things. I'd look at how close they were to my arbitrarily chosen numbers, and then I'd give them the reports. And it could be everything from, no report came in to, wakes sighted. Or in one particular case, the Japanese carrier spotted the American carrier right off the bat. Couldn't do anything about it, but they spotted them. And then from there, we had them organize their strikes, and I once again sort of cribbed the strike information from another game, also from Striking Effectively First, so that it created a different dynamic. So Japanese, they launched their strikes differently from the Americans back then. So the options that you had in this game were either you would do a coordinated strike of basically, you'd hold back your cap and then everything else you could send in as one strike, or you could do deck load strikes, which gives you basically 2 strikes that you could send to either the same location or different locations. And that would represent the way that those Japanese carriers would operate in pairs.
Right.
And then the Americans would have the option of either doing a full strike as just the carrier or sending each individual squadron off.
Right.
You do the smaller strikes, you end up having this sort of arrival time mechanic. So you have a readiness roll I had readiness rolls for the cap, readiness rolls for, launching. And I just had roll a bunch of dice at the beginning and consulted my charts. It was a lot of work, but I put it together by, cribbing things from other sources. And it ended up working really well behind the scenes, because what I've found with running these big games is that a lot of times the players don't actually care to know how it's made. They just want it to happen. So
that's huge to remember. And I come from a role-playing game background. It's kind of where I started about the same time as I was playing Hex Encounter. And how we played RPGs in the 70s is different than I see people playing RPGs at conventions now. There's a lot of rolling the dice out in front of the players. There's less hidden things happening behind the GM screen. Like I used to never know what the GM rolled for anything, and I never had the faintest clue what any of the possible results could be. And I think most players truly don't care. They like the surprise. They want the story. They don't feel like they need to know, did you roll a 4 or did you roll a 5? Which of these results is it going to be? No one cares. You tell the story that we are now participating in. And I'm sure you found even at some points you sometimes had to kind of cheat a few things and go, well, crap, if I don't change these results, either the Japanese are never going to find the Americans or vice versa. And you're trying to tell a story and you're trying to husband a gaming evolution through to be fun, and you can't just always leave it up to just the dice.
Yeah, I mean, I was expecting something like that to happen. Fortunately, it didn't in this game.
That's good. You're lucky.
Man, they all found each other pretty quick. The main Japanese force didn't have much luck with their scouting. They located the American cruiser force, but were only able to identify that there was cruiser-sized ships. And they found the oiler that was out there, but only had it as a wakes spotted. But they had no contact on the main carrier. The Japanese, the Shoho they spotted the carrier. They spotted the cruiser force. They also had a single spurious contact of a wake in one thing, which I was just going to say was, I'm sitting here talking with my hands. That's a submarine that's, on the surface for a while. So you have a wake and it's going to be disappearing. So you go out there with a strike. There's nothing to hit.
Nothing there, yep.
And then the Americans had spotted the Japanese and they had noticed a cruiser-sized vessel, and then they had noticed multiple wakes, and they didn't know that they'd spotted both Japanese carriers. So they had to sit there and weigh, okay, which one of these is probably our target, and they sent off their strikes accordingly, which is how they ended up striking the Shoho before they struck the main Japanese fleet. And it ended up being a real nice dynamic because they didn't know what they were really deciding, just that they had information and that there was a risk involved with it.
Yeah.
That was fun.
Yeah. I think there's, as I've alluded to, the tactical decision making, that element, it's fun when it's not just line all your forces up, run at the other guy. There's elements of, okay, this is unsure. How much of my forces do I commit? And putting people back in some of the decision making that literally had to happen there in World War II, because at Coral Sea we're both blundering into each other, both forces, and so it's not we have pinpoint knowledge of where the Japanese elements of their fleet is, and what the readiness of their aircraft. It's not that kind of scenario, and I'll digress for a moment of history here, and of course Steve and Brett, their eyes can roll back in their head at this point. This is always one of those fascinating parts when I look at how people, dissect the battle afterwards. And one of the comments I was reading, and I can't remember if Parcel said it or who said it, but it was a victory for the Allies because the Japanese weren't allowed to do an amphibious assault in Port Moresby. And I'm like, well, they still landed like literally on the other side of the mountains and walked over. I'm like, we didn't dramatically delay things. It's fascinating when you see the amount of aircraft lost by the Japanese, the fact that we lost the Lexington, as Cruz and I were discussing, not necessarily all through Japanese action, but the things that happen when you look the day after the battle, it's not a dramatic shift. It's everybody kind of pulls back and says, okay, we took some losses. We still don't really know what's going on. And then through a little bit of deception on the Allied side, and a little bit of internal politics and friction on the Japanese side, nobody follows up. The Allies kind of fool the Japanese into thinking that the carriers are still there, or the carrier is still there, that they haven't left, and the Japanese are arguing between basically Yamamoto and his deputy anyway as to are we really going to attack, and that you get this very hesitant command system that goes on. But I think it's fun to have that kind of a takeaway from a game where people are like, all right, we have to make decisions with imperfect knowledge,
And this is Cruz. That's really shown up in the after-action reports from the pilots. Both the Japanese pilots and the American pilots returned and said, yeah, we sunk 11 cruisers and 4 battleships and 6 aircraft carriers. And the American intel is now trying to figure out, okay.
Well, and I'd forgotten. I think we reported we sank 37 Japanese ships or something crazy like that. And I had totally forgotten that. I was rereading some stuff today, prepping for the podcast. I'm like, oh, gosh, how do we even think there were 37 Japanese ships in that part of the expedition? So the entire southeastern fleet didn't have that. But
imperfect intel.
It is, and I tell people this based on firsthand experience with it. There's a difference between what people report in combat because they're trying to inflate things, and then people reporting stuff in combat because they just have no idea. They're like, I don't know, we bombed something over there and we bombed something over there, and that means 2, right? No, they're actually the same ship, you idiot. It was 5 minutes apart and the ship had turned,
and you actually missed it both times.
Yeah, you missed it both times. Yeah, exactly. Congrats, your bombs detonated, but in case you missed it, they detonated in the wake of the ship. So there's combat reporting is always terrible. And so you always have to discount the first reports and really dig into and cross-reference as much as you can. But I will turn it over to Stephen Brett. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Cruz.
If I can jump in just real quick, he was talking about the scouting, but me as a guy who played it, from my perspective, I was on the American side. And so, you've got these areas and you're going to try to scout. You're going to try to see if there's stuff there. And you've got land-based aircraft from the American and Australian, New Zealand, that are all in there trying to find, the ships for you. It was American doctrine at that time that each carrier had 2 Douglas Dauntless squadrons. One of those was dedicated to scouting. And so we decided amongst ourselves, well, if they're dedicated to scouting, we're not going to keep them back for bombs. And so we sent them out scouting too. And so we kind of really flooded the whole area with scout planes. And we think that may be one of the reasons that we ended up finding the Japanese and they didn't find us. The downside of that was we went in with 2 less squadrons worth of dive bombers than we would have if we had kept them back. And all of this took 10 minutes of real time. I mean, it came and it went quickly. We made all these decisions. And I've been in games where you can scout for hours before you actually ever get around to doing anything. But because of all the stuff David had done behind the scenes, he just said, okay, what do you want to allocate? And I'm rolling dice. And here we are. And anyway, I just thought that was a very eloquent way that he did that quickly so we could get the planes on tables fighting each other.
Yeah, I think Steve and I have seen that at several historical gaming conventions where people are doing Midway, Coral Sea, any one of the carrier battles. And it's funny because it reminds me of why I never liked playing the old Hex Encounter game or the old board game Midway. I don't want to spend the majority of the game trying to find the enemy for one final turn where I get to actually do something tactical and attack them. That just doesn't interest me. I'm sorry. Let's minimize the search phase, make us have to make decisions, but let's get into the meat of the game, which is fighting it. Steve, Brett, I know you guys have done campaign systems. Obviously, Squadron Forward was a big inspiration for a lot of stuff you guys have done. Does any of this, I know we've looked at Carriers in a Bathtub and a couple other things. Does any of this interest you that maybe we need to do Pacific campaign stuff now?
Man, I think the scouting thing might be kind of a cool way to pair people up potentially. in like matches if you do like open play in an event, right? If you're kind of like, oh, you scouted this and that's going to evolve into you playing this person, or you scouted this. Like, I feel like there could be kind of like a neat dynamic there with something like that. That really has me intrigued quite a bit.
Yeah, I think it would be an interesting way to also make a more narrative competitive game in that sense. If you wanted to do a tournament, but you picked a historical time frame and you picked historical sides, then the scouting mechanic can help you build in a reason why you're playing player X, the person you're next up against lineally. It can have a gameplay mechanic behind it.
I'm interested to learn more about how the different tables looked and how you put together, what determined, which table you ended up and how that gameplay progressed.
Okay. Well, yeah, as Cruz said, I'd set up several tables. I used 1/700 scale models for the ships because I'd come into possession of a good number of those through an estate sale. Somebody who had very lovingly collected a massive portion of the Japanese fleet. And then I just built a few of the American carriers with my sons. So we ended up having tables that were set up with basically either the one or two carriers, whichever the group was, and then a couple escorts. And really, depending on who you got contact with, you'd have a roll to see, what their readiness of their cap was, and then a roll to see what your arrival time was. And if your arrival time was before their cap readiness roll, you would arrive while half the cap is launched. Or if you had a late arrival, or sometimes you could even lose the way and not even arrive, which we didn't have happen, thank goodness. But I had that all set up. So really what table you'd arrive on and the angle had just kind of come down to die rolls. So the Japanese had the misfortune of, when they were attacking the American fleet later on after the Shoho had been sunk, they came up from the rear of the American ships. So, they weren't coming in with that nice side aspect. They were coming in with the narrow aspect. And the Americans had the chance to send out a radar-directed intercept. And they didn't know this at the time, but they only had a 50-50 chance to actually make that intercept cruise. So if y'all had rolled below that 4, those planes were just gone. So they did this successful intercept on the Japanese, and there were a ton of them got shot down, and they got driven off. But when they got driven off, the Japanese fighters chased them, which means that the rest of the bombers went in without any fighter cover for 2 turns, which is what we had rolled for when the fighters were going to return to their duties after they'd finished off their chasing. And that ended up making a big deal on that assault there. Big difference. So yeah, the different tables and how you ended up with them, you'd end up in over the open water if you had the intercept, or if by some freak chance you ended up in the same sort of sea zone as each other. That would be really hard to do, but I had that eventuality prepared. And we were able to run 2 to 3 of the tables sort of more or less simultaneously. And I was leaning on Cruz a lot to keep one of the tables running while I was setting up some of the other ones, and he did a great job. So there's a lot of legwork, but with the mechanisms that were already there through a couple excellent rule sets, it wasn't nearly as hard as it could have been.
How long did it take, basically, first turn to last turn?
First turn to last turn with a pizza break in the middle and like some conversations about T-shirts, probably 4.5 hours maybe?
Well, we were supposed to start at 10, but your group struggles in between 10 and 11. So it was probably closer to 11 before we got serious. And we were done we were just sitting around talking by about 3:15, and the battle was over. And that's, like you said, we took some breaks to talk T-shirts. We ate pizza.
That's better than Brett. Even when we played Malta, when we did that big Malta game, but we started at like 10 a.m. and finish at 4 or something like that. It wasn't near as, it was one big table, not a lot of separate ones.
Yeah, I just remember it took a while to eat for each side to play so many aircraft in 3 different factions.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we want to do Malta again, and I'll throw this out to Steve and Brett. The guys from Nerds of War had said let's do an event, and they kind of doubled down on doing Malta because we've already got mats and already a lot of airplanes for it. So we may have to blatantly plagiarize some some work here from David and from Cruz, because I think if you had a Malta interception and strike kind of mechanic, it's not necessarily the same because you're not searching necessarily for the other fleet, but you've got naval actions where you've got an ability to launch things out of Malta, and now do you recover your patrol aircraft while the German bombers are coming in, or there's a lot of different targets of opportunity that can be out there rather than just a big furball over Valletta Harbor. So I'll throw that gauntlet down, Brett. Figure that one out in the next 6 months.
That's easy. Got it.
Exactly.
I've probably already done the work.
Yeah, we pretty much have. We've nailed it down for Malta, and I'm glad that Don and everybody said, "Hey, let's do Malta because at least we have all the airplanes already painted." I think so.
Yeah, but there was only like 9 planes at Malta. These guys had like 240 aircraft. It's not going to have the same wow factor.
No. There was like 100 planes every 30th day in Malta, and then all the British got shot down, and they're back to 3 planes the next day. But then the next wave flew in, and they're back to 100 airplanes, and they all got shot down. And so, yeah. So, sorry, Ken. Sorry, Roger. I'm making fun of the Brits again. This goes back to, this is totally unrelated to the topic at hand, but Malta is a fascinating battle to me. I enjoy studying Malta. Battle of Britain has no interest for me at all, and I realize it's the same combatants and everything, but Malta just to me seems so much more interesting. All the side things that were going on with going out and hunting German shipping, trying to defend British shipping, trying to get 30 aircraft off the carrier to land in the middle of a dogfight over the middle of Valletta Harbor. That stuff's kind of fun. But anyway, we digress from what we're supposed to talk about. All right, so you said that that the vast majority of your players were not BRS experienced, and you did like some of us have to do to get the game going. You give them the quick in brief. What are some of your lessons learned, suggestions for people who say, yeah, I want to do a good sized event with my group. My group's got 10, 15 players that'll show up, but none of them ever played Blood Red Skies. How do you mitigate that herding of the cats, as I'll call it?
Oh, I'm a tyrant. The other games that I run that are usually pretty big are American Civil War steam vessels, so Battlemobile Bay and conjectural raids on Charleston Harbor and stuff like that. And we use a set of rules for that no one else in the group owns, and I control them with a tight fist. And I mean, really what you need is a situation where people are willing to respect the ref and realize that, okay, maybe he's wrong about X or Y or Z during the course of this game, but it's better for the flow of the game for him to be consistently wrong and scrupulously even-handed about it than for me to make an issue about it and pull out, okay, I'm going to go through the rule book now for the next 20 minutes and just kind of sit out my turns and not participate. We discourage
You
that
mean
in the
like me
group.
playing Achtung Panzer? No. I think I'd already been tabled at that point by the time I broke out the rule book and started arguing with Mike Lewis. So, no, it's a good point to understand that when you're doing a narrative game like this, it has a referee, an umpire, a game master, someone that's honchoing it, and in a sense, they're like the TO. Their call goes, whether it's what's in the rule book or not, or how anything should be done. Their call goes because it's your responsibility to keep that game on the rails and going forward.
Yeah, and it has worked well for us across many different game systems, and it's worked for Blood Red Skies. It can work for probably anybody with Blood Red Skies. You just gotta, be a tyrant and be willing to be unpopular with somebody for the next 15 minutes, because they will get over it. You're all friends there, hopefully. And if they don't, then, well, they won't be a problem next game.
Yeah, exactly. Well, how did you draw so many players? Is that just pure game club loyalty that everybody says absolutely will show up for the next event no matter what it is? Or how did you?
Oh, no, there's way more less than 12. We've got, probably the core set of the group is about 8 to 10 fellas, and then we've got a bunch of ancillary guys who will come in whenever they are able to get a pass from their wife to come in, because a lot of us younger guys in the group, I say us younger guys, none of us are young, but
we are young. Cruz and I will agree that you're young.
Yeah, we got tons of kids stuff that happens on weekends, and that creates problems for some of us. And we've got a couple newlyweds in the group, and we got a couple people that have been they're from farther outside of town, and they can't always make that hour-long, 2-hour-long, or in Cruz's case, like 3-hour-long drive to come down and play with us. But we tend to have pretty good turnout as a result. It's a rotating group of guys, but probably the overall group is 20, 30 strong, and there are some people that you'll hear about, and it may be a year before you end up actually meeting them. But
yeah,
we get there on strength of numbers. Fortunately for us, Tallahassee's a university town. Also, unfortunately for us, Tallahassee's a university town, so it brings in a lot of people with that gaming interest, and then there's a lot of professors and teachers and other nerdy types that love to participate in that. So we're able to kind of get that going through. So it's kind of an artifact of where we are.
It's funny for me, and I laughed. I don't think I told you this, Cruz. So Tallahassee holds a special place in my heart for two reasons. One is I did attend Florida State for 1 year before I then sold my soul and went to the U.S. Naval Academy to learn discipline. But that's where I started playing 40K. So a buddy of mine that was in Navy ROTC with me introduced me to Rogue Trader, and I still remember his little hunched over beaky Marines from, first edition Rogue Trader. Big chunky Land Raider with the side las cannon sponsons. And that was really Florida State was my intro to miniatures gaming, because prior to that, like I said, I'd been a role-playing game guy, and most of my time at Florida State was still role-playing games. But I'd been a Hex Encounter guy, so I'd never had large miniature armies. And then after that, I got bit by the bug and got into the Warhammer 40K world, and that and Epic for years, collecting miniatures. But yeah, it's funny because as soon as Cruz was like, yeah, we're down in Tallahassee, I'm like, oh, that's good. And I'm like, oh, that's bad. I can get in so much trouble in Tallahassee. I don't know if I can make it down there.
Well, if I could jump in just real quick, because I've been doing demo games since the 80s in various games. And one of the problems I've always had is somebody really wants to understand the rules, really wants to bore down in the rules, really wants to kibitz over every rule that's there. And in our case, I had played 2 games, and of the 12 of us that were gaming, I was the one-eyed guy leading the blind because nobody else had played a single game. But we had a fellow show up who really wanted to learn the rules, and so he immediately is bombarding David with, well, why are you doing this instead of this? And, I just read here on page 16, and it says this. And either the guy did it himself or David did it, got him over on the side, away from where we were gaming, and he was neck deep in the book. He's trying to learn the rules, and every few minutes, David would go over there and let the guy regale him a little bit about, you're doing this wrong, or is this correct, or is that, and then he would come back over and run the game, but it never let it impact the game. And I have never successfully done that. So, David, I was extremely impressed. I'm giving you credit for making that happen. But, because there is always somebody who really, 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 even though it's inappropriate for the situation, wants to understand the rules and really dig down into the rules.
Well, and I tell you, I was that guy with Achtung Panzer, I felt bad because everyone else is playing, and I'd literally already been tabled, lost both my tanks, and said, hey, I got to leave here in a bit. I don't want to, I don't want to start 2 more tanks off and start another round of the game. But as things are happening, Mike Lewis is still, in a sense, learning the game, and I'm reading the rules. I'm like, are you sure that's the way it works, Mike? I don't think so. And we're trying to figure stuff out. And I'm like, man, I read the PDF of this, but now that I'm physically looking at the rule book, I'm flipping pages, so there's always that guy that detracts from the demoing of the game by trying to dig down into the rules. So Mike Lewis, if you're out there listening, I apologize, but by God, did we screw up Achtung Panzer? But it was fun. It was fun, but oh my God, we mangled those rules. So anyway, we've covered a lot of different things in the podcast. We've covered a little bit of history. We've, covered playing the games, the event that you guys did, and how you kind of coordinated it. New players. This is the thing that I always hammer down on, and it was great to have you all in Blood Red Skies Ready Room showing what you'd done. I was laughing as Matt, the Fighting Kentuckian, was showing playing with his two daughters and playing Blood Red Skies in what I would call a rules optional kind of setup, which I think we've all played at some point with kids who want to push models around and no one really wants to care what the rules are at that point. But what are some of the techniques you guys have for getting new players into the games, getting people to say, hey, I know you're a grognard, but guess what? This is not a details game. This is not a simulation. Or, hey, I know you're a hex encounter guy. Come borrow my models. What are some of the techniques, David, that you and then Cruz have used?
When we're dealing with like the people who really want to get into the nuts and bolts of it, one of the other fellows in our group, Pat Tracy, will always say, you've got to choose your level of abstraction.
Yes.
So we kind of, hammer that home with them of, we're here to have fun, and I will talk with you for hours later about, the other stuff. The other guy that Cruz was talking about, he's apparently decided that he wants to run mosquitoes and play Blood Red Skies, and okay.
That's good.
He got bit by the bug.
I've enjoyed watching a lot of people fly mosquitoes, and some do well, and some get absolutely tabled. But it's like everything else. It's I'm just glad that people want to play the game. I enjoy it. I don't fly multi-engine because it makes my head hurt. I'm not that smart, so leave that to other players. Cruz, what have you found to sucker people in and to draw them in?
I was a salesman in real life, so you're selling the sizzle. And so you're going, hey, look at this period. Are you interested in this? This is kind of cool. We're going to do a plan. This is the only, I'm retired Air Force, but this is the only Air Force or airplane game I've ever played, weirdly enough. Never even played a board game airplane game in all my years. And so this is my only experience with that as an aside. But you're just selling the sizzle, and we're talking about Coral Sea and how cool that was and the decisions you're going to get to make. And one bad decision could send your planes off. And the rules are going to be easy. You won't have to worry about it. And so you ease them into it, and you're selling that, hey, you're going to feel like you're a fighter pilot in World War II kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then, of course, 30 games in, we're all arguing in the Nitnoy rules down here, because that's just the way life progresses. But to start with, you're up here at 40,000 feet, and you see what the rule set can do. I mean, you are feeling like you're commanding Cap, you're commanding a strike on an American carrier. So you get them to understand the goodness of what you're trying to do, and then 30 games later, when they're arguing with their friends over some rule down in the weeds, hopefully they still remember why they got into this darn thing to begin with. And in this case, I've had a number of the people that played our game that are hoping David will do it again in November.
Nice.
Because they want to play it again. And this is news to David because I haven't brought it up to him before. But
that's correct. Okay.
What's the problem of success?
After baby number 5 arrives, we will put a pin in that.
That sounds like the Domestic Tranquility Act has been invoked, and you will not be doing any gaming and playing.
That is my other hobby aside from wargaming.
But anyway, that's it. Is you keep it simple. You focus on what you're trying to create from the history side, and to try to get the gamers in that way. And then next thing you know, they're building and buying airplanes and painting them up and talking about what they're going to do better in the next game.
Yeah, I think Steve and Brett will say that, especially the over several months campaign. Thankfully, at least you guys are playing that virtually. You're playing on tabletop sim, but at the same time, both of you guys were modeling and painting stuff. So it's kind of funny how one of the good things, I guess, bad for our checkbooks, good for the hobby, is that Blood Red Skies, it's a low barrier of entry to get into it. And then if you suddenly want to change up and say, well, let's just change theaters, it's not like you've totally invalidated everything you have. You can still play that when you go back and play Pacific Theater. But if you say, we want to do North Africa, it's not a lot of models to start that. It, of course, ends up being a lot of models when you enjoy playing, and now you want bombers, and now you want, attack aircraft and all that stuff. But I've always maintained that's the beauty of Blood Red Skies, is you can change theaters at the drop of a hat and 6 more aircraft.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing with Blood Red Skies too. Like you were saying about making you feel like a fighter pilot, or kind of like making you feel like you're flying planes, right? I don't know any other games where you walk up to the table and somebody's like, yeah, you're going to control these 9 planes, right? It's usually like, you're going to control this one plane, you're going to control this one bomber, and you're going to have your big ass clipboard with 19 different things about that one plane, you know? And when you can control like 5 or 6 planes as a brand new player, and you start making those decisions, it really kind of like opens up your sight picture of what the possibilities of the game are really, really quickly.
Yeah, I think.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah. One of the players we had, 13-year-old kid, it was his second time ever showing up with anything in the Wargaming group. He he was the poor commander of the Cap of the Shoho and his 4 little planes against 2 American carrier strikes, and he got they wiped the floor with him. It was horrible. And this last Wednesday night, I ran into him and his mom, and he was just raving about how much fun he had with it. So
good. That's good.
Yeah, even it's one of those games where even if you lose, you have enough of a narrative and you still feel like you have fun, as long as like, you know, have that right attitude towards it. So
yeah. Well,
he lost his carrier, he lost all his planes, but by golly, it was great.
Yeah, Cruz saw it with the Vietnam scenario, and I tell people, you know, we were talking about it here in Huntsville the other week. That scenario, it's not how bad. It's not will the Americans win or lose. It's how bad will the Americans lose, and will the Americans will they trade aircraft to get to the target? Will they jet their bombs and say, forget the target, we want to shoot down MiGs? You know, it's not a question of how you're going to win. It's just let's mitigate how bad we're going to lose. And I think the interesting thing with some scenarios like that is it gets you over the hurdle of thinking you're going to have a balanced game. This is not a balanced game. You're getting bounced by a bunch of MiGs on the way to the target, and the odds are stacked against you. But by golly, you have a lot of fun going, I'm going to make it to the target. I'm almost there. Nope, I was 2 inches short of moving off the board, and now they broke my squadron. I have too many boom chits, and I'm going home. So, you know, I think I enjoy that part of the event, that there's a lot of things that can happen that all fit the narrative. And like you say, they make you feel like you're the fighter pilot, that everyone's about to make it off to the target and they're good. And then everyone says, no, we're bugging out. We're going home. You know, we've taken too much damage, too many losses, abort the strike. So I love the historical games. I love the narrative. I think it's just such a challenge that a lot of people, for whatever reason, they just say, oh, that's a lot of effort to put into it before the game. Yeah, it is. But when you get 12 people playing, that's, to me, that's a lot more fun than just mano-y-mano, you know, face punchy competitive playing, which is also fun in its own way.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're going to try a historical scenario, there's plenty of other tiny, janky little things that are really fun to do that are other early war carrier raids. You know, can't think of any of the island names right now, but
well,
you know,
I tell you don't have to go get the Check Your Six source books. Go grab. Those books are amazing because I've used them a lot for Blood Red Skies. You look at all their scenarios, and they're very well done from each one of the different authors. And if you can't think of how you want to do a scenario for anything in World War II, I will say, go pick up the Check Your Six source book for it, or you know, even Jet Age stuff. If you say, I don't know how I want to do a scenario for Indo-Pac, go get the War in Kashmir book from them, open it up, and you'll be able to take exactly the scenario they had, turn it into Blood Red Skies in a couple minutes, and have a fun game. Because there is a burden of historical research, matching aircraft, all those things to make a balanced game. But at some point, we just want to put airplanes on the table and make pew pew noises, right, Brett?
Yeah, and you know, if it's big enough, then balance doesn't matter anyway.
Yeah. Well, and I always say that historical battles aren't balanced. You may get the exact same historical outcome no matter how well you play, because the odds or the situation or the skill levels were all stacked against one side or the other. You know, you look at the Japanese naval air forces after Midway, the odds are stacked against you. You have so many, you know, inexperienced pilots that there's a reason it's called the Marianas Turkey Shoot. You know, it's you can't play the Marianas Turkey Shoot 1 for 1 and expect anything other than the Japanese to lose because they're flying pilot skill 2 against an average of like a 3 or a 4 on the U.S. side. So it's not going to happen. But it's still, there's ways to make those games fun. There's ways to make them challenging by doing a subset of whatever it is and constraining it for people to play. Well, we've been chatting for a little over an hour. Anything, Dave, that you want to really leave us with from your experience hosting this game, running the Battle of Coral Sea for Blood Red Skies?
Running a big game is a really rewarding experience. Even though I wasn't pushing around any of the planes or any of the ships or anything like that, seeing the results of the hard work was really the biggest source of my satisfaction on it. Yeah, I love it.
Awesome.
And I love that, we've got some good rule sets out there with good support and good model support. And there's so much accessibility that I can take this absolutely crazy idea of doing, in meat space as opposed to in like cyberspace, such a huge battle and actually being able to pull it off with, without having a huge logistical team supporting me or anything like that. It was,
that's
awesome.
Nice. It was really good to see that and see all the images and crews. Thanks for the detailed battle reports. So I really appreciate that. I know the Ready Room liked it, and it's always good to see what other events people host to push the edge of the envelope, because it's just kind of funny that people are like, oh no, I'll never play with more than 6 or 8 airplanes. Hold my beer.
Well, this is Cruz. I reported the news, but David made all the news. I mean, all that was what David did. So
Yep, absolutely. But no, I really appreciate you putting all the info and the photos up there. It was good to live vicariously, because I was not playing Blood Red Skies that weekend and having any fun. It was purely a move stuff from a friend's house weekend. So it was painful. Steve, Brett, anything else you guys want to throw in as a parting shot?
Yeah, I want to know, what was the plane count, the actual
what was
number
the final
of
plane
aircraft?
Count? Let me pull this up here. I actually have that. Ish. All right. Yorktown had a total of 9 F4Fs, 18 SBD3s, and 7 TBDs. Lexington had 11 F4s, 18 SPDs and 6 TBDs. So 20 fighters, 36 dive bombers, and 13 torpedo planes.
That's like 65 planes, I think, right? If I'm doing the math in my head quick.
Yes, 65, 69, something like that. And then there were slightly more than that, like 75 or so Japanese planes. So I had it at 11 zeros for the Shokaku, 10 dive bombers, 10 torpedo bombers. Then Zukaku had 13 zeros, 11 dive bombers, 10 torpedo bombers, and then poor little Shoho had four zeros, 2 Claudes. They did
the mighty Claude.
remarkably well. Oh my gosh, they did so well. They murdered so much stuff because they rolled and started advantaged above everything else. And then
Nice.
3 of the torpedo bombers, which died ignominiously on the deck and exploded when they were dive bombed.
Whew, that's a lot of so like 130-ish planes. Wowzers.
Yeah, ballpark.
Dang.
being run by 12 guys, 11 who had never played the game before.
That's impressive. Steve's already his mind's
about 4
working.
hours.
He's like, how do I stream this all? How do I stream something that big across multiple tables?
Dude, that's
If
awesome.
you want my tables and stuff, I'll happily give them to you.
I mean, that's just awesome, right? When you think about like our furball games, sometimes when we run that furball game, it's kind of like crazy, and there's like, you feel like stuff's going on and it's hard to like manage, right? But man, it's not 130 planes.
No, it's not. That's why I laugh, because it might be 15, 16 people, but it's 2 airplanes each. So, you got like 30 airplanes you're running at one time. And that feels like that's herding cats at times. So definitely hats off to you, Dave, for knocking that out of the park and doing that event. Brett, anything on your end?
I think I heard that Cruz is in Jacksonville. Maybe I've got a newfound campaign game buddy.
Oh, I'm actually in central Georgia. I'm a little over 4 hours from Jacksonville, but I go there to game, and I go to Tallahassee occasionally to game recently because that's only 3 hours away. And then I go to Atlanta because that's only 2 hours away, but I'm in the middle of nowhere in rural Georgia. But I've got a number of gaming buddies in Jacksonville, which I'd be more than happy to introduce you to for a nominal fee.
Excellent.
Yeah, if you're down in Jacksonville, just, I can let you know. You can shoot over if we're doing a big game of some kind.
Yep, Brett always feels like he's cheating on us. We tell him that that's fine. We're ambi players. We'll let him play with other gaming groups.
Yeah, we have an open gaming relationship.
Yeah, exactly. It's open gaming relationship here. I cheat on all you guys on Monday nights anyway. Chris and I go play Aeronautica.
Yeah, that's kind of messed up. That's like a whole different kind of game too. That's like super cheating.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of like having a second family. Sorry, guys.
With a dog and everything.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. They're cheating on me. I didn't play this last week, and only 2 of them were there. So they went and they played with the BattleTech guys, and that's like insult worse than injury, because we always tease the BattleTech guys. We're always kind of competing with them, and when our own guys sell out and go play with the BattleTech crowd, I'm like, damn it, we failed. But no, we'll be back in another week or so and get back to Aeronautica. Well, thanks, everyone. Really appreciate David, you for running the event, for coming on the podcast, and Cruz for you making the intros, and us having a chance to play there in NashCon and play a couple games. I appreciate you guys doing all that. And thanks to all of our listeners out there. The standard comment of please like and support the podcast, leave us reviews, tell us how terrible we are, that we don't know anything about history, and that we're a bunch of buffoons who really shouldn't even be playing the game. That's fine. I love that kind of feedback. At least it's better than no feedback at all. And I'll leave you with this for the parting thought was, everyone says that the victory at Coral Sea set up the follow-on victory at Midway, but I'll ask you this. If you lost 25% of your carrier fleet, is it really a victory? This is embarrassing.
Wow. You were distracted. That never happens.
Normally I hit record because we're saying such hilarious things at the start of the podcast.
Yeah, way before we even start talking, you're recording usually, yeah.
Now we're all out of mojo. Brett's shirt's going to come off at 13 minutes.
That's right. Prepare yourself.
I'm glad. I'm like, why is Steve waving his hands at me? Oh, because I'm an idiot and I didn't hit record.
But that's exactly why, because you didn't hit record like when we all got on. Like when
we all were talking about stupid shit.
Talking about something else.
That's where the outro always comes from, the stupid stuff we say before we start recording. I mean, before the show starts, there's all this stuff that gets recorded.
So much stuff that gets recorded, half of it I have to throw away anyway. I'm like, we can't put that on the internet.